and I think I will kick us off. So thank you, everybody. Well, before I do that, I'm going to hit record. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Annalisa Helberg, and I'm an extension educator statewide in food safety, on-farm food safety, good agricultural practices at the University of Minnesota. And I have the pleasure of working with my colleague Ariel. Ariel, I'll let you introduce yourself.
Hi, everyone. My name's Ariel Pressman. I'm based out of the Twin Cities. I was a longtime organic vegetable farmer, and now I work as a consultant, and I get to do a lot of work with Annalisa and farmers around the state, specifically on food safety and post-harvest practices.
Thanks, Ariel. So today I'm going to share just a few slides to get us going before Ariel takes over. The U of M on-farm GAPS education program is statewide. We offer food safety training for fruit and vegetable farmers of all sizes, all types. So GAPS, those good agricultural practices, I recognize many of you in your names have been to those over the years. We continue to offer those and kind of update them and focus on new and different things. And over the past year, we've really been focusing on post-harvest handling, pack sheds, and kind of like making sure that our product is clean and safe and ready for our customers, especially wholesale customers, schools, these kind of people. So that's kind of what we're going to be focusing on over the next couple of webinars. But we also continue to offer the Food Safety Modernization Act produce safety rule trainings in conjunction with our colleagues at the Department of Agriculture. I'm always available to review food safety plans. We create fact sheets on pertinent topics, short videos, and just general technical support. So if you find yourself wondering after these webinars, how can I find that packshed component? Can you help me use my sanitizer? I really am not understanding this label. Please reach out. It's our job to help you. And I'm also able to hire Ariel to help you as well. He's able to come and do some in-person visits if that makes sense for both of you. So use us as resources as you have questions. I also, we both really focus on kind of selling to wholesale and what that means, especially relating to food safety, farm food safety, post-harvest handling. We have the last four in the webinar series this winter. Our pack sheds today, and then next time kind of like a scaled up, larger version of pack sheds, semi-enclosed or fully enclosed pack sheds. And then post-harvest equipment, really taking a deep dive into that equipment. Mechanized things like brush washers and barrel washers aren't just for the largest farmers. They really can improve some efficiency. So we'll be talking through tips and tricks there. And then coolers. Just wanted to say these good agricultural practices are what we do to improve food safety, really tied to product quality and shelf life as well. We've heard from a lot of our colleagues that are food service buyers, food hubs, and shelf life when you're selling to a school really matters, or a school buyer, because they might not use that product for much longer than a person at a farmer's market. It might sit in their cooler for a week, maybe even longer. So the product quality becomes really paramount. So that's why we've kind of tied food safety and food quality together, because the practices are really one and the same. Okay, and that is it from me. So I'm going to stop sharing and let Ariel share his screen. And as we go along today, this is meant to be for you, informal, helpful. Please put any questions that you have in the chat as we go, and I will monitor the chat. And if you have questions that seem really pertinent to what he's saying right then, I'll ask him. And if not, I might wait a little bit, but we will make sure to answer all of them. We are going to be done at 12:10, and then we have a few evaluation questions at the end.
Great.
Okay. Take it.
Great. Thanks, Annalisa. Well, it's good to see everybody. I saw some names in the room I know and a lot of names I don't, which is always great. So just real quick, like I said, my background is I was an organic vegetable farmer in Western Wisconsin. I farmed for 10 years. And I'm coming at this work from the perspective of having been in a lot of different situations in terms of my resourcing, the scale of my farm, the amount of money I had to invest in my farm. And Annalisa and I have been working a lot over the last 2 years to try to figure out how can we help growers for any number of reasons need lower cost pack sheds, need pack sheds that might be more portable, but also ones that can be efficient and food safe. So we recognize, like I said, you may be looking at that because of the amount of money you have, because you're on rented land, because your farm is growing quickly. I've been there. I've been in all those different situations. But today we're going to be speaking towards kind of how do we do this in a lower cost but still efficient and food safe way. Okay, so our agenda real quick here is going to be we're going to talk about how do we figure out what our needs are and how we match the pack shed to those needs. What are the essential components of a pack shed? We'll go through some visual design examples of different pack sheds that we've either helped set up or we visited. And then we'll talk through where do we actually buy these pack shed parts. So I think one way to think about this is almost as like an active brainstorming session for you and the different options for your pack sheds. So I tried to make it hyper visual today. I think it's a really good exercise for you as you're hearing all of this. Take some mental notes or written notes on kind of this works for me. I like how that pack shed is set up. I don't like how that pack shed is set up. It'll just give you a lot of ideas about how you can kind of move forward. And like Annalisa said, if you need a brainstorming partner after this, we are super happy to work with you. We can do site visits. I can definitely work with you to help source different materials or kind of work through specific concerns for your farm. Okay, so to start, I think we need to start with the most basic question is why do pack sheds matter? Everybody on this call is probably coming from a slightly different position. Some folks may not be packing inside of a structure. They might be coming from a farming background where maybe you've just been packing on a table under a tree. Maybe you've been packing at home in your kitchen or your garage. So I just want to kind of level set with why this matters. The first and most important thing is you need a controlled space. I think one of the most basic concepts in food safety for produce farmers is if you can't control the space you're in, you can't ensure that it's safe. So it's really important that we have a controlled space where we can kind of control the elements, we can control if different pests or rodents are making their way in. The second that I think we often don't look at enough is increased efficiency. As we're growing our farms, and especially if we're growing our farms to some of these wholesale accounts, it is really, really important that we can wash and pack vegetables quickly and efficiently. Otherwise, it's going to be very hard to make a profit. We need a place where we can store not just produce, but also supplies and equipment. So always asking yourself, it's not just a matter of where are we packing the carrots, where are we keeping the harvest knives, the twist ties, the rubber bands? Those things also need to be kept in a controlled space so they can be safe. And then again, Annalisa already referenced this, but the better our post-harvest handling is, it's not just safer, it's going to last longer and it's going to sell better. For many of us that are moving into these more wholesale accounts, it's very different than a farmer's market environment where we might say pick on a Friday, sell it on a Saturday, and then the people who buy that produce might expect it, they might cook it up on a Monday, Tuesday, or Wednesday. When we are selling into a food bank or the Good Acre or a restaurant, they're sometimes expecting our produce is going to last 1 to 2 weeks, maybe even more. And how long it lasts is going to be very much determined by the type of post-harvest handling we have. If we can wash it and bring it down to temperature quickly, it's going to last much longer. And to do that, we're going to need a pack shed space. Okay, so matching the pack shed to your needs. And by the way, on the right-hand side, I'll talk about this more later. That is me as a much younger man, probably, I don't know, 12, 13 years ago. That was my first pack shed. So like I said, if you kind of can look out the door there, you can see this is in the driveway. You can see my truck is parked behind it. I'm absolutely coming this as a perspective. If you're on rented land, I've been there. We couldn't build a permanent structure on the first farm I was on. So what you're looking at right now is a Costco carport sitting in the driveway right by my house. So we're going to talk through some of the needs, some of the things you should think about before you kind of design your pack shed. So first is consider what utilities you need. And by that, I mean both water and electricity, and how much water you'll need. Even if you don't have access to water, it still might make sense to put up a shed. So you have a shady area to pack vegetables in, you've got a place to keep your supplies. But, kind of to state the obvious, we don't want to buy wash tubs if we don't have water to actually fill it up with. By the same token, maybe you're thinking to yourself, I'd love to get a barrel washer, but if we don't have electricity, that's not going to work. So we first need to kind of do an assessment of what utilities we have. The second piece is, again, this seems obvious, but I often see growers kind of skipping over this question. What type of produce are we actually processing in the shed? So as an example, if we don't have any produce that needs to be dunked in a tank, let's not buy the dunk tank. If we don't have any bunches of items that need to be sprayed off, we don't need spray tables. Maybe we're just buying produce that generally doesn't need either. Maybe we're just growing something like winter squash and it's being grown on landscaping fabric. We may not need any washing equipment. So really think through what are the items that you need to have washed in your shed and what's the why of what you're putting there. Make sure everything has a reason in your space because in these temporary sheds, they're going to be small. We're often talking about a 10 by 10 to a 10 by 20 space. So the space is at a premium, and it's going to be really important to think through why we're doing what we're doing in this space. Okay, also think through, do you have any larger bulky equipment? So again, that example of if you're going to have a giant barrel washer, we need to account for that size. We need a bigger space. And the other question is, like I said, you can see kind of in that photo, I don't think you can see where my wax boxes were, but we were also using my shed for dry storage, for wax boxes, for supplies. If we're doing that, that's going to determine both how big the space is, how much racking we need. Again, it's kind of how we're thinking about this space. Okay, so kind of the uncomfortable question, but the really important one is you also have to match your pack shed to your means. We all have access to different amounts of capital or financing. We all have different levels that we're comfortable spending on our farm or loans that we're comfortable taking out. I really encourage you, be honest with yourself. How much money do you have to spend? We can recommend pack sheds that are going to be anywhere from basically free to tens of thousands of dollars. There's no right or wrong answer here, but let's not spend time sussing out a $10,000 pack shed if you feel like you only have $500. We can figure out something that actually meets the income level that you have and what you're comfortable with. The second piece is how much time do you have to source low cost or free supplies? So often in farming or any business, it's either kind of money or time, right? If you have a lot of money, you can save time. If you don't have a lot of money, you're going to have to spend more time. A lot of the ways we can do pack sheds cheaper are going to involve finding free or low cost materials that we're reusing. If you are, say, working a full-time job and farming on top of that, and you don't have a lot of time, let's be honest with ourselves that we're probably not going to be driving 2 hours away from our farm to find a used tent. So I'd really encourage you to just be honest with yourself as you're going through this process about your income level and your supplies. Okay, so some other questions that I think are important to ask. Are you renting land and is it a short or long-term lease? So I ask that because the permanence of the structure we're building is probably going to be determined by whether we own our land and how long we're going to be there. So for example, you're probably not going to want to put in a concrete floor if you only have a 1-year lease on your farm. Even if your landowner allowed that, do we really want to invest $5,000 in something that we can't pick up and take with us? By the same token, there are certain types of carports that are technically temporary, as in we can take them down and move them, but it is going to take a lot of labor to build them and then take them down. So it might make sense if we have a longer term lease. We know we, hey, put a bunch of time into this. Now we get to use it for 5 or 6 years. And it probably would not make sense if, again, we're just on a year-to-year lease. Do you get high winds on a regular basis? So if you're a farmer, maybe in Western Minnesota in the prairies where you regularly get 40, 50 mile an hour winds, you're going to need to secure your structure in a very different way than if you're in an area where that's not an issue. So you can think about this in a very similar way to how people often think about greenhouses or high tunnels. In the same way as if you build your high tunnel south where there's no snow, you're not worried about snow load. In our part of the country, you're probably only picking high tunnels that can take a significant amount of snow load. The last question to ask yourself is, are there any structures or parts of structures that can be repurposed? Me and Annalisa were just on a farm, I think last year, we were talking through a pack shed, and then we kind of looked over and we're like, wait a second, what are you doing with that garage? And the farmer had no plans for the garage, but was planning to build a pack shed. So our advice was, well, why build a whole new structure if you already have one there that you can repurpose? Sometimes that even means there's just an old cement pad on your farm that a building used to be on, and maybe now you can build on top of that. Maybe you can build a lean-to. off of a current structure. But I'd really encourage you before building something from scratch, think about how you can utilize what you already have. And finally, think about your labor. How much produce are you going to be processing at once? How many people will be in the pack shed at once? So, for example, if you're just going to have one person, maybe just you in the pack shed at a time, it's going to be much easier for you to efficiently move around in the pack shed than if it's you plus three employees. So, what you can't see in this picture that I have of my farm is we actually had two different dunk tank stations set up. One, when you entered in, went to the left, one went to the right. And the reason was that meant two teams could work processing produce at the same time without everybody bumping into each other. The question of how much produce you'll be processing is probably going to be dictated by your business model. If you're doing a farmer's market where maybe you're just doing a little bit of, say, 15 different crops, you may never get to a point where you're trying to process hundreds of pounds of produce at the same time. If you're doing wholesale, you might get to a point where all of a sudden, like on my farm, you've got 500 bunches of kale that all need to be washed. That's going to necessitate a very different flow, very different type of equipment, and a different type of pack shed than if you're just doing farmer's market where things can kind of come in more in bits and pieces. Okay, so we talked about at the start of the presentation thinking through what are the crops you're actually going to push through your pack shed. In general, when I'm thinking about that, I like to divide crops into four categories. And again, everybody's going to find an exception to these rules, but these are just general ways to think this through. I think there's kind of four categories of post-harvest cleaning. So the first is things that we're generally not washing. So things like onions and tomatoes. So to state the obvious, those things don't need infrastructure for washing because we're not washing them. Some things are sometimes washed, like winter squash and zucchini. Some things are usually sprayed. They're not dunked in a tank, but they're sprayed off. Those are usually bunches of root crops, so things like bunch radishes, bunch carrots. And then some things are dunked in a tank. So those are usually leafy greens that we need to cool down quickly. So those are often things like salad greens and kale. So again, as you're thinking about the equipment and infrastructure you need, start with the crops, then think through how do they need to be processed, and that's going to dictate how we actually put things in our pack shed. So again, the post-harvest needs are going to be determined. They're going to tell you how much water and electricity you need. You know, if you have a well that can only do 2 gallons a minute, but you only need 17-gallon wash tubs, that's not a big deal. But if you can only get 2 gallons per minute and you need a 300-gallon wash tub, if we do the math, that's going to take 150 minutes. It's going to take 2.5 hours to fill that up. So the utility is not really matching the processing need. Also keep in mind, sometimes how we grow the crops determines how they need to be processed. So for example, on my farm, we grew zucchini, bell peppers, things like that on plastic mulch. And that meant they didn't get very dirty. So we did not need to wash them. On other farms, especially if you have heavier soil, you're not covering the soil, it's going to be pretty common that you're going to get a bunch of dirt and gunk on them. They're going to need to be washed before they're sold. So it's important not just to think through the crops, but also like how are you growing them? For example, items in high tunnels probably need a lot less washing on the whole because you don't have the rainwater splashing down and then splashing dirt up onto the crop. Okay, so we talked a little bit about equipment, but again, like we talked about, we've determined the crops first, then how we wash the crops, then that determines what equipment we need in the pack shed. The biggest thing I'd really encourage you to think through is to right size your equipment. I went to a farm a couple of years ago that had a barrel washer like this one on a farm where they were barely doing any barrel washing. And it was taking up literally 2/3 of their pack shed. They'd gotten a grant for it. They felt like we can't turn it down, but it was actually causing way more harm than good because it was just taking up so much room. So just think through what the right sizing is. Make sure you've got enough equipment capacity for what you're harvesting, but I would not recommend getting more capacity, especially in these temporary pack sheds where, again, the space is at a super premium. Okay, so I want to talk through some essential pack shed concepts here, and this should apply to any type of pack shed you're doing. So whether you're doing a temporary one, a more permanent one, whatever one you're doing. So first of all, it has to be safe structurally. And I'm saying that because as we put up some of these tents, these carports, some of these kind of like piece together systems, sometimes as farmers, we're not thinking about how safe it is. You got to put together something that's not going to injure you or your employees. So definitely think about whether it's safe. The second piece is hygienic design and being easy to clean. So make sure no matter what you're building, you can see all the areas and you can clean them easily. That means we don't want little corners that are hard to reach. We don't want surfaces that aren't food safe. We want to make sure that it's really hygienic. Something that often gets missed is well lit, and this can be really difficult. Like you can see in the pack shed picture I have here, the nature of the material over this pack shed makes it pretty dark. But again, it's really hard to clean if you can't see what you're cleaning. It's also really hard to clean and grade produce if you can't see it either. You know, if a dirty pepper and a clean pepper look the same to you, it's going to be hard to know what you want to send out to your customer. You want to have an efficient use of space. So again, thinking about like the purpose of this is to do it efficiently so we can be profitable. And then like we already talked about, you want to make sure the space can process the type and quantity of produce that the farm has grown. Okay, so we're going to go into detail on this in a second. To my mind, these are kind of the essential pack shed components, and there's obviously way more components you could include in a pack shed, but I think this is the essential stuff to consider when you're kind of piecing together your space. So first of all, we need a structure that provides a controlled space. We need a floor. That floor should not just be the ground. We need some way to cover the ground so we don't get dirt. We don't get all the things that come along with dirt. We need tables. We need shelves. We need wash and pack equipment. We need hand washing, so a place to wash our hands before we're processing produce. And we need water and preferably electricity. One other thing that's essential, like I said before, is you need good lighting. I didn't put that as an essential component because on some farms that'll look like just providing more natural light. On other farms, if you have electricity, that might mean actually installing lights. We've done a little bit of work with solar lights, but I haven't honestly gotten good reports back from farmers to know if you kind of get enough light to make that worth installing. Okay, so let's start with the structure, and there's a lot of different options here. And again, I want to point out we're talking about kind of more portable, low-cost structures. So I'm not going to talk very much about like building a pole shed or pouring concrete floors. We're going to talk about more of the low-cost stuff. So all the way on the left-hand side are fabric carports. Um, the one on the bottom is what it looks like when you're buying generally the more expensive models that are a little better for snow load. They give you a little more space. The one on the top is like the cheapest one you can get from Menards. I think it costs about 150 bucks. I will say, when me and Annalisa first started doing a lot of this kind of portable pack shed work, we were under the impression that carports were going to be the answer. We have come to the conclusion that they are honestly much more annoying to build than we thought. They're pretty difficult. So I would say be honest with yourself too about your construction skills and your capacity for just being frustrated. Even that simple one up top was quite the process to put together. That being said, it is a good portable structure. They tend to be very affordable. You know, the one at the top, like I said, is 150. The one on the bottom is probably closer to 1,000. The other option is in the middle. You see, we've got these tents. The top tent is just a market tent. I'm sure people have purchased them. You know, they're generally between 80 bucks and 200 bucks. Anybody who's been to a farmer's market knows the value equation. They're affordable, they provide shade, they're also pretty flimsy. I would say if you're going to be using a tent like that, you should really plan to take it down at the end of the day every day. They are not going to withstand good wind. They're not going to be what you want to go for. The bottom one, and I'll give resources at the end of this presentation about where to find everything, is a much more heavy duty tent that me and Annalisa sourced. That one costs about $500. And I love that it both has sides and windows and a door. And it's also very, very heavy duty. Like it takes two people to put it up. That's one where I would recommend if you can't take it down every day, you want to go with the tent on the bottom. I will say you probably want to take that one down before storms. Again, none of these tents are really meant to withstand significant winds or anything like that. See, somebody asked in the comments too, what about steel carports? Yeah, you can absolutely go for steel carports. The downside to them is they're going to be much more expensive. The ones I've seen are generally starting at say $2,000 to $2,500. And they're also going to be much less portable in the sense of, you're really putting them together with screws and metal plates. So you can absolutely go for them. They're just going to be a lot more work, not as portable, and they are going to be more expensive. Steel costs have gone up enormously over the past 5 or 10 years. So on the right-hand side are more what I'd call kind of improvised sheds. And I love both these photos are from the same farmer. So I love that it really kind of demonstrates how we move from one to the other. So I love that the first one, it was really just kind of materials that they found around the farm. But that one was probably built for about $0. And even though it's maybe not the prettiest, it is way better than no pack shed. I can promise you this is a much better, more efficient structure than just packing under the tree. And I love in the second one, it's like, okay, now we probably have a little more money, a little more time and experience. So now we're building a more formalized structure. One thing that's really important that's part of that structure and is really part of the safety is the stability of the structure. So I think first of all, we need to acknowledge if you are working with a fabric carport or a tent, you by definition have structures that are not super stable. So I don't want to lie to anybody and make it sound like, hey, you probably don't want to be in there if there's 50-mile-an-hour winds. Um, that being said, there are definitely ways to make it more stable. If you can do it on your farm, honestly, probably the best way to make it the most stable and not fly away is that top left photo of just really just encasing kind of the footings in concrete. Keep in mind, the concrete will stop your tent from being able to fly away. It will not stop your tent from collapsing. So again, I just really take into account, the safety of the structure in the conditions as they currently are. Below on the bottom left, those are ground augers. Those are pretty common. So you basically just attach those to the tent, you screw them into the ground, and that makes it really hard for the tent to lift. Um, I think the ones that I like the most, though, are kind of this, center left two photos where you literally just ratchet over the structure and then tie those down to ground stakes. That makes a lot of sense to me for creating a lot of stability. Um, that kind of middle right photo, if anybody's been to a farmer's market, we know that's how we weigh down our tent. I think that's great, but again, I would just really qualify that with that's only going to go so far. So if you're doing that just when you're packing for a couple hours under a tent, I think that's great. I would not assume that's something where you want to leave your tent up for the whole season like that. To the right is something I haven't seen a lot, but I've kind of been recommending with a couple sheds. Anybody who has a greenhouse or a high tunnel knows that that is wind bracing. So that's basically making it a lot harder for the structure to shift. That's a pretty easy thing to just install using, even PVC or EMT that you can buy at Menards or Home Depot. To me, that's just a common sense thing you might want to do with some of these carports to strengthen them a little bit so they're less likely to kind of shift and eventually fall apart. Okay, the floor is often the hardest part because we have a lot of options and none of them are perfect. So the one me and Annalisa have worked on a lot is pallets. So you can see we've got two types of pallets on the left-hand side. You can usually buy plastic pallets used for a pretty affordable price on Facebook Marketplace. There's pallet dealers. There's one called Pallet One if you're in the Twin Cities. The only thing I'd recommend that we've learned the hard way, make sure you're buying strong reinforced pallets. The average pallet that's just being used to say like ship soft drinks to a Super America is not built for the weight of a person standing on a spot. It's built for weight being distributed across the whole pallet. So make sure you're buying ones that are reinforced. I would also recommend ones, both of these are probably fine that I have photos of, but if you look at some of them, they tend to have pretty large gaps on top. And that's going to create a tripping and injury hazard. So just make sure it's something that you're comfortable walking over and make sure that it's something that's reinforced enough for your weight and the weight of the product that you're putting on it. The middle picture is a farmer we work with. They basically just installed a deck floor. I think if you're comfortable with that, this is a great option. So it's literally just like building a deck. You just do it inside of your structure. And then on the right-hand side, the upper right is gravel. We built that using a GeoGrid, which is something you can buy from a company called Beaver. I think you can find it from some other places as well. It's basically just a grid you put down and then you fill up with the gravel to give it more stability. Gravel is pretty cheap. If you're in an accessible spot, you can get a truckload of gravel dumped off pretty much everywhere for a couple $100. I think that's a great option. And then, on the bottom right is landscaping fabric. If you are short on money or time, landscaping fabric over dirt is going to be way, way better than nothing. It'll create less mud. It'll make it a little easier to walk over. You can buy a chunk of landscaping fabric for probably 20 or $30 for a 10 by 10 structure. So again, all of these have their pluses and minuses, but I'd really encourage you think through having a floor. It's going to make a really, really big difference, especially with all that water coming out of your pack shed onto the ground. You don't want to be standing in mud. You don't want to be attracting animals that'll want pooled water. We also have a lot of food safety risks when we have standing water that might be splashed onto our vegetables or our processing equipment. Okay, so there's a couple different ways to get the water into your pack shed. I tend to be a fan of the things that are the simplest. I am not by any means a whiz at carpentry or construction, so I tend to go for the stuff that doesn't require tools. So it's a little hard to see in this picture, but I tried to give you an idea of how I like to set it up. What I like to do is run a mainline hose from my water source, so from the spigot, run that up to the peak of the structure. So that's kind of my main line. And then I basically just use one of these kind of four-way water valves as my water distribution system. So the main line is going into the top there, and then anything that you're using to spray off produce or fill tubs is getting connected to one of those bottom four faucets. I like that it makes it pretty easy to turn them on and off. It's just an easy way to distribute water. For me, generally, what I like to use is for the main line that you're running in, I like to use a heavier duty kind of 3/4 inch hose. That way you're getting access to kind of all the water. You're getting it at a higher pressure. That's a hose that's going to be exposed to the elements since it's leaving your shed, so it's less likely to kind of fall apart. So I think it's worth spending the extra money on kind of like the contractor grade and the 3/4 inch. Within your pack shed, I don't see any reason to spend more money than you have to. So I just go with the really cheap 5/8 inch, which is kind of a standard garden hose. The picture I put there is 25 feet. I actually like to go for the smaller lead hoses, so the ones that are 5 or 10 feet, because then you don't have all this extra hose kind of getting jumbled and creating a lot of chaos in your pack shed. I've also seen farmers that kind of want to plumb in their water, so using PVC and things like that. That's perfectly fine. It's great. It just requires kind of doing some cutting and gluing. And for me, I feel like this gets me where I want to be, frankly, with a lot less work. Okay, hand washing, super important. I think for, you know, if we're thinking about anything as far as food safety on our farm, hand washing is probably number one. There are a lot of different ways you can do this. So all the way on the left is the system that I believe Annalisa designed with extension. It's just really a wood table. You've got a way to distribute water. You've got a catch basin for that water, and you've got a place to keep supplies like soap, and paper towels. Very importantly, you want to make sure that whatever's distributing the water is something where you can turn it on as a valve and the water flows freely. You don't want to have something where you're having to like hold down a button with one hand where you're trying to wash the other hand. But yeah, that works great. One of the simplest solutions we found is that fish table. So the second one in. You can buy those from places like Fleet Farm or Tractor Supply. They're generally sold for hunters who want to be able to like gut fish or other wildlife, but they actually work great as a hand washing station. So you basically just hook the hose up to that faucet there. You put a 5-gallon bucket under that little tube where the water's coming out of, and you just get a little box to keep your paper towels and your soap in, and you're good. And they cost about 70 bucks. And they're also a folding table, so they're really easy to move around the farm, which I like a lot. Um, Third picture in is at Big River Farm. I think that's a great system too. They have a lot of farmers, so I like that they really spent the time to get a big barrel, so they've got a lot of water in there. And then the picture all the way on the right, I love because it just shows this can be really, really cheap and simple. As long as you have a spot where you can put that water tank on top of, you're good to go. And oftentimes having something portable is great. If we can bring hand washing with us into the field, it means if somebody accidentally touches some animal poop or sneezes or something like that, they've got an easy way to wash their hands and go back to work. And I think making these things accessible is as important as having as having the right items. Okay, so next up is tables. This is one that I tend to not want to overthink. I think the banquet table, the folding banquet table, is uh, pretty standard for a lot of farmers in their pack sheds. The one all the way on the left, I like also has some adjustable height to it, which is nice. But generally, you can get a 4-foot or 8-foot folding banquet table for less than $100. I'd really encourage you to get the folding versions. Sometimes you can save a couple bucks by buying ones that don't fold. The nice thing about the folding I found on my farm was when it comes time to clean, you can easily fold them up, put them outside of the pack shed, and now it's really easy to access all of the areas around the shed. All the way on the right, sometimes you'll be able to find stainless steel, like restaurant style tables on the cheap. If you can find them, absolutely go for it. But these things brand new are super expensive. Like I think that table that I took the picture of, the stainless steel one, is approaching $1,000. So I would not recommend buying them new. I don't think there's very much of any advantage over the banquet table. Certainly not enough advantage to be worth the extra money. That being said, it's not uncommon that if you check Facebook Marketplace or auctions, you're going to find people are letting things go for pennies on the dollar. And by all means, if you can find them, it's great and it looks real nice. Shelving is another one. I see a lot of farms kind of overlook shelving. Shelving, to my mind, is kind of like the sleeper, one of the most important things in the pack shed. And the reason is if you don't have a place to put something, it's going to end up on the ground. And the ground is the least sanitary place where we can keep anything. So I'd really encourage you to invest in having a little bit of shelving inside of your pack shed. It'll also help a lot with the efficiency. All the way on the left, that's plastic shelving that we found at Menards. It's like $60, and you can put it together in 5 minutes. I think that's going to be sufficient for 99% of farms. If you want to buy more like NSF wire racking, that's what's in the middle. That also works really well. If you are building a larger pack shed space and need shelving that can hold a lot of weight, I would also say Costco tends to sell like really, really heavy duty shelving. But I think for most farms, that's going to be overkill. The two pieces of shelving we have here can hold more than enough weight. The other piece of the shelving is have some containers to store stuff in. Again, the shelving is nice, but if all the rubber bands are just kind of like flowing off the shelves and they're all over the floor, it's not going to do much good. I personally like to buy clear containers because then it's just a lot easier to remember like what's in the containers. Again, you're not very efficient if people are constantly putting things in the wrong containers. You're wondering where the rubber bands are. You can buy those Rubbermaid totes at pretty much any hardware store, and they're very affordable and they're a really good investment. Spray tables are one where Annalisa and I have gone through a lot of different design options over the years. Again, this is something where you can completely shop build it, or you can buy one ready-made. So the one all the way on the left, which I have a link to that I can share with folks, is my favorite. It's really heavy duty. It's kind of built for retail displays or greenhouses. It's very hygienic. It can hold all the weight, and it just comes done. Like you don't need to build anything. The one in the middle is kind of a compromise. You can buy greenhouse bench tops. You can usually buy them if you're in the cities from a place like Carlin Supply or BFG. And then you just literally make a wood table and screw them on top. And then all the way over to the right is the super cheap option where you can just use anything sitting around the farm, like easels or anything like that, and just, place your spray surface on top of it. Again, if that works for you, if those are resources you already have access to, those can work great. Personally, for me, I think for the price, which is like $80, I'm a big fan of the table all the way on the left. I just think it saves some time. It's well built. You don't need to bring out the tools. It can do everything you need. I also like, by the way, that you can take the legs off, and again, you can easily move it around. You can take it out of the shed if it's time for cleaning. We talked about wash tubs a little earlier. I'd really encourage you to right size your wash tub to your operation for a couple reasons. One, if you're buying a wash tub that's too big, one is taking up too much space. Two, you spend a bunch of money on it. But three, the thing we're often not thinking about the most is it takes a long time to fill up and a really long time to empty. Some of these like 300 gallon tubs, they could take an hour to fill up and they could take an hour to empty out as well. So I'd really encourage you. One of the things me and Annalisa have realized is some of the farms we work with, they're not processing a ton of produce at once. They're kind of doing that farmer's market where it's like 10 bunches of this, then 20 bunches of that. That's why I really like these 17-gallon tubs that we also have the link to. That's the right size for the operation. They're quick to fill up, they're quick to empty. Same deal with those options on the right. The top right is a design I think Annalisa came up with for just kind of some smaller multi-bay kind of compartments to wash produce in. The bottom right is a triple wash sink. Again, you can sometimes find those at restaurant auctions. One of the things I'd really recommend though is if you buy a wash tub, pay attention to the size of the drainage plug. So I really like these Rubbermaid tubs. Most of them come with, it literally says oversized drain plug. It is double the size of the drain plug on most of the other wash tubs we've looked at. And again, it can just be painfully slow, um, kind of trying to drain out some of those tubs. So I'd really recommend getting one with a larger drainage hole. I will also say one of the pieces of the more hygienic design and the food safety in the shed is you don't want pooling water. So if you have 150 gallons of water all dumping out right where you're standing, no matter what you have there, the ground's not going to be able to absorb it. Annalisa has some really great resources she put together on how to kind of like attach hoses or different things to the drain plug to move the water away from your pack shed. So it's not all just like sitting on the ground right where you are. I'd really recommend you think that through because again, it doesn't seem like much, but when you think about it, like 75, 100, 150 gallons of water, that's a lot of water to be on the ground. Okay, and the other thing I'd really encourage you to do, I think the most fun part of being a farmer is we get to be creative. Like we can come to these webinars, we can get advice, but in the end of the day, we get to do whatever we want on our farm. So I wanted to give you three examples of really creative things I've seen on farms. All the way on the left is a hands-free bunch washer a farmer built. So you can kind of see there's a foot pedal on the ground. So they have both hands to hold bunches of produce. They press down the foot pedal, and that puts pressurized water, and that way they can be super efficient with both their hands. The middle one is a barrel washer that me and Annalisa worked with a farmer on. So we literally took a new cement mixer, we made some modifications, and we turned it into a small barrel washer. All the way on the right is a homemade spray table that I found on the University of Vermont website. Again, if we're talking about saving money, that looks like they found a couple things on the farm. I think that might be snow fence or even some, I don't even know, plastic wire. It looks like it's PVC, and that's it. So that was probably a $5 build for them. But I'd really encourage you, as long as you're following the basic concepts of hygienic design, you're making sure you've got food safe contact surfaces, it's easy to clean. This is a really good way to go. And somebody's asking, how well did the concrete mixer barrel washer work? I believe it worked pretty well. It doesn't work for everything, and it did take some fussing around with. But if that's something you're interested in, we'd be happy to either connect you with the farmer that built that or kind of share some of our learnings. I would say, as you're thinking about hygienic design, the barrel washer in the middle, there's a reason, like we didn't buy a used concrete mixer. We've literally seen farms do that. Not a good idea, right? Because you don't know what's been in there. It's hard to clean out all the concrete, all the chemicals. So it's good to get creative, but we also want to, keep a good eye on the food safety.
Hey, Ariel, do you want to mention about those lock line modular hoses?
Yes. So you can see on both the hands-free bunch washer and the barrel washer, this is called lock line. Um, I don't know what purpose it was really built for, but it's kind of this brilliant thing where you can almost connect it like Legos, and then you can insert a bunch of different pressurized valves. So the farmer who worked on this was able to kind of just build it to suit her needs. And again, I really like there's just one tool you use that kind of just like winches them together, and that's it. So it's a really fun thing to experiment with. And again, actually, we started thinking we were just using the lock line for the barrel washer, and then the farmer on her own kind of invented the hands-free bunch washer, and found that was a great use too. So again, I think getting creative, see what people are using. I think you could build a lot of fun stuff out of it. Okay, so I'm going to go through a couple different designs here. And again, think of these as just prototypes. Think of these as ways to just think through what you might want to do. So the first design, where we've got a couple examples, is an open-sided structure. This one that you can see here was built out of scavenged wood and metal siding. This farmer, when I visited their farm, was really, really good at keeping an eye out for free or low-cost stuff. And I like, again, they're not trying to do too much here. It's just very simple. Spray table, dunk tank, hand washing, a place for supplies. The floor is landscaping fabric. I don't know if it's easy to see, but I think they were really smart too about using the topography. So all of the water is going to float down away from the shed. And I think that's really, really nice because then you don't need to worry so much about drainage or pooling water. So I'm going to estimate they spent about 500 bucks on this. They probably spent less, to be honest. And the pros are it's inexpensive and provides shade. The downside is there's no sides, so it's hard to control your space, like a bird could fly in there. It's a pretty small pack shed area and it's open to pests. So That's not to say it's good or bad, just to say it's got its own specific kind of pros and cons. These are some other examples and maybe another viewpoint. So on the right is the one we just saw. On the left is another farm we visited where, again, my understanding is they found most of this at a restaurant auction, and then just built the rest out of it, out of stuff they found on their farm. I think one really fun thing to do is sometimes not even start with an idea of what you want the shed to be, but go, we're going to build this around what we find. So if we found a triple wash sink, all of a sudden that's our wash basin. You can see they've got like a paper towel dispenser like you'd have at a restaurant. I don't think that's necessary, but if you found it for $2 at an auction, why not? Like it's a great idea. Again, I love that they're taking advantage of the topography. You can see how all the water is getting plumbed in at the bottom, and then because it's flowing away from the shed, it's not going to be a problem. And again, these are some other ones we looked at for open-sided. So again, these two on the left are the ones we looked at before. I love how cheap these are. You're just reusing materials. You're using what you have around the farm. On the right-hand side, this is a farmer we worked with last year. Um, they really um, they really decided to invest in their shed. So you can see we've got same thing like a pallet floor, but they built a really, really nice structure. Something that's going to last a long time. I love that it's got the metal roof that's peaked. I love that it was built for snow load. You can see it's providing a lot of shade, but there's also a lot of light. So again, you can go as far as you want, or as not far as you want, just depending on your resourcing, how comfortable you are building things. Okay, option two, which is not quite an open-sided option, or maybe it is, but I tend to think of as a little different, is a market tent. Generally, this is going to be more or less expensive depending on what type of tent you want to buy. So you can either buy a low-cost tent for $100, you can spend 500, even $1,000 on higher quality tents. Again, it's pretty simple on the inside. You've got a spray table, dunk tank, hand washing. If you're using the more expensive um, tents, this is going to get a little pricier. I would plan to spend $1,200 to $1,500 and invest most of that money in a tent. Um, the pro for me is this is really inexpensive and easy to move, right? I mean, you could literally pick this up and move it anywhere on your farm with no notice. It's also really easy to take down if there's going to be a big storm or for whatever reason you want to take it down. Um, the cons are, again, it's not going to survive extreme weather. This is not something that's going to be able to take snow load, high winds, hail, anything like that. And because of the snow load thing, you're going to have to take this down over the winter. It's not going to survive the winter. Got some other examples of folks we've seen doing this. Again, you can make this as simple or complicated as you want. The tent all the way on the right here is the one that me and Annalisa are now recommending. It's from a company called All Tents, so we've got a link for you on that. This one cost about $500 and it's a 10 by 10. This is the one that comes with the sides. And if you really squint, it's kind of hard to see in this picture. You can really tell when you look at the innards of the tent that this was really built to not crumple. So I really like the idea of investing a little more money knowing this is going to last us for a long time. Okay, finally, we talked about a carport. So again, picture on the left, that's me. That was my carport. We packed a significant amount of produce out of those. I think that's something else I wanted to point out. These temporary or low-cost pack sheds, you can do a lot of produce in. We were able to pack about $100,000 a year worth of produce in this carport that I got from Costco. We probably could have done even more. So it's not just that these temporary or kind of lower cost pack sheds need to just be for super small farms. I got this one from Costco. I think you can still get this model. I like that it was a transparent beige because a lot of sunlight could get in there. I got my wire racks from auctions in Costco. Again, talking about kind of using what you can find. You'll notice my floor was built out of rubber mats. I'm not going to say that's the best idea, but I found them basically for free in an auction. So I said, why not? That's my floor. That also worked okay because it was on top of a gravel driveway. And this ended up costing me about $1,500. I like that it was a controlled space with good lighting. I will point out when you're buying carports, a lot of times the cheaper carport material is going to start falling apart really quickly. I'd say after 2 or 3 years, this material started kind of getting brittle, kind of like tent material does, and flaking. So sometimes when you buy a carport, it might be better to invest the extra money to buy the higher quality material that it could come with. This is a carport option we collaborated on with some farmers from Colimo. This is a much heavier duty, higher quality carport. Again, you can kind of see where we're suspending the water up top. This is providing a lot more space. This is probably a 10 by 20 space, so it's about double the space of one of those 10 by 10 tents. Again, I like that it's higher quality and has a lot of space. What I don't like is that it's poor lighting. We also learned the hard way that some of those pallets are not good pallets to have on the inside. So you can kind of see these pallets stacked out front. That's the model that's not going to be able to withstand you standing on top of it. The pallets in there are the ones we found were heavier duty. You can often tell they're heavier duty by how the top is built. And sometimes you can literally look in there and see that there's metal reinforcements around the corners. That's a good indication that it's something that can withstand you standing on top of it. These are kind of what the innards look like, just to give you a better idea of how we set it up. Again, we tried to set up multiple stations to be efficient. So there's one station on one side, the wire racks were kind of the dividing line, then there was another station on the other side. And this is a smaller carport design we worked on with a farmer in Northfield. You can see one of them we built using some of that Beaver material and some gravel. The other one we just put down landscaping fabric. Both are totally fine. This is probably the cheaper option. These are the carports that cost about 150 bucks. They were, like I said, they were a bit of a pain to put together, but beyond that, it does give you a nice big space to work within. And you can see there's plenty of space for the wash tub, the spray table, the storage. This one all the way on the right, we ended up installing just some J-hooks on the corner so we could hang a lot of stuff so it wasn't sitting on the ground, which ended up working out really nicely. Okay, so where do we buy this stuff? We went through a lot of different options. I'll give the caveat, obviously, you can and should buy this stuff wherever you want. We're not endorsing a specific place, but we did want to share with you some places where we have been able to buy materials. So cheapest option is the market tent. For me personally, you can find those market tents usually from Menards or Tractor Supply. They're $100 to $200. There are a lot of places that offer high quality tents. The one that me and Annalisa worked with was called All Tents. I personally wanted to buy from them because their tents were pretty affordable for high quality. So we ended up spending about $500. There are places you can buy tents from that cost thousands of dollars. I really can't speak towards whether it's worth it. We just wanted to go for something that would be a little more affordable. Fabric carports you can buy from Menards. You can also buy online from Shelter Logic directly. Those are going to vary anywhere from a couple $100 to a couple $1,000. And somebody brought up those metal carports, like the picture on the far right. Those probably start at a couple $1,000 and can get just as expensive sometimes as putting up a pole shed. Again, when you're buying the tents or the carports, keep in mind they're not built for snow load generally. And you need to kind of come with your own ground augers and wind bracing. Generally, they're not going to give you that type of stuff. Or if they do, it's going to be woefully insufficient. For the floors, plastic pallets, I would highly recommend buying them used. Be careful. Sometimes we've seen plastic pallets where they have like, who knows what they were being used for before. They have unknown substances on them. But if you buy the pallets new, they're outrageously expensive. Like if you go to Uline, I think they're charging like $150 or $200 for a plastic pallet. That's not necessary or affordable. Oftentimes I see people selling them on Facebook Marketplace pretty affordably. If you're in the Twin Cities in the northwest suburbs, there's a place called Pallet One where they sell them really affordably, which is nice. Again, only buy the reinforced ones that tend to have those solid tops. You can buy gravel or stone really easily. If you're going to buy gravel, I actually recommend don't go to Home Depot or Menards. Just call a local landscaping company, have them bring a truck and just dump it all on site. And you can get high quality landscaping fabric pretty much everywhere. I would recommend buying the higher quality stuff. Don't buy the really cheapo fabric feeling landscaping fabric. I like the one that feels a little more plasticky. It's going to last a lot longer to foot traffic. Tables, shelves, wash tubs. Again, you can buy these from pretty much anywhere. Menards, Costco, Home Depot work really well. Those Rubbermaid stock tanks that have the big openings, the only place I've seen those sold are through Tractor Supply. You may be able to find them elsewhere, but that's where me and Elisa found the ones we liked with the really big outlet holes. That 17-gallon tub we showed, you can get from a place called US Plastics. They are a little pricey, but I like that they're food grade. They're really big. They already come with like a valve where you can empty the water out. Um, but you can find these at most of the places where you're probably already shopping as a farmer. The spray table, I think Annalise already put it in a link. It is called an SPC Retail Benchmaster. I am sure they're available from other places. We bought ours from the Webstaurant store. One word of caution I'd give you is we like buying the smaller ones because the shipping costs are really low. Because the top is solid, if you're buying one that is bigger than the one you can see in this picture, the shipping costs get pretty outrageous because it's shipping all as one giant big piece. And then again, these fish cleaning tables, you can just Google them. We got ours from Home Depot for about 60 bucks. I'm sure you can find these in a number of different places. Okay, so if you haven't gleaned this from me already, I love auctions at Facebook Marketplace. I basically got all the equipment and supplies on my farm over the years from just keeping an eye on auctions in Facebook Marketplace. You can often find things at like a quarter or less of what they would normally cost if you're keeping an eye out. You can keep an eye on larger auction websites like Auction Masters that tend to host a lot of restaurant auctions or places that might have the type of stuff you're looking for. I'd also recommend making regular visits to places like salvage stores. So if you're in the Twin Cities, there's a place called Bauer Brothers. There are lots of other options like that across the state. But have in your head a list of things you're looking for and check on a regular basis. So this is why I love places like this. I pulled these off of Facebook Marketplace for real. These are not just my made up examples. So with a Uline, you could see you could buy a really industrial 5-foot section of roller table. It would cost you 350 bucks. Or you could get a more appropriate 7-foot section of roller table on Facebook Marketplace for $20. That's a lot of savings. I literally pulled this one off Facebook Marketplace yesterday. So there's that 10 by 10 Shelter Logic carport I told you about. That's 170 bucks on the Menards website. On the left-hand side is the exact same one for $35 that somebody's selling. Um, always take into account your time too. State the obvious, the used one probably has some issues and you got to take it down. But if saving $135 is important to you, that's an option and that gets you what you need so you can have a structure on your farm for your pack shed. I think auctions can be a little intimidating, but especially restaurant auctions can be great. For reasons I don't understand, buying things new for a restaurant are insanely expensive, and they almost sell always for pennies on the dollar when the restaurant goes out of business. So again, I pulled these from an auction website 2 days ago. you know, the auction isn't over for 7 days. This will go for a lot more, but I immediately found four things that seemed like a really good deal. So you've got the, five kitchen shelves on wheels. I really like things like dunnage racks that tend to be in coolers. It's just a nice thing to have in your shed. So you're some surface to put stuff on that's not the ground. There's a really nice hand washing sink with foot pedals. There's a commercial salad spinner. So again, I would just spend some time checking out restaurant auctions, getting comfortable with this. This can be a really, really good way to find used items at a really good price that works for you. One thing I'd really recommend though is not everything should be purchased used. Again, these are two things I pulled off Facebook Marketplace yesterday. So a 300-gallon stock tank is really expensive. $150 is a screaming deal. We can take one look at that tank and know that's probably not something we can ever bring to a point where we're going to feel comfortable processing food in that. I think anything that's probably been used with livestock is something where I'd immediately say that is not something we ever want to use for produce. So you can see how gross it is. On the right-hand side, some people use slat flooring for either like spray tables or for flooring in their shed. Again, this is stuff that we know was used in a hog barn. That's not something where we ever want to assume it's going to be appropriate to use for processing vegetables. So figure out some stuff where we're okay saving money. Buying things from a place like a restaurant is great because we know it's been largely kept in a food safe environment. It's been interacting with food. Buying things on farms can often get a little sketchy because we don't know how they were treated. We don't know what's interacted with them, and we're probably not ever comfortable getting them back up to kind of a food safe environment. All right, and that's what I got. And it looks like we've got, Annalise, I think probably about 10 minutes for questions, and then we'll have some evaluation at the end here.
Great, thank you. Does anybody have any thoughts or questions on what Ariel presented? Oh, Deb is asking to put the contact email slide back up, Ariel. And Carl, I see your hand up. Got a question or a thought?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Uh-huh.
No, I just wanted to emphasize what you said right off the bat about context and partners. There's something in all of this ag world we don't talk about enough is context. What is your context, including how much money and your scale and all that. So I think that cannot be emphasized enough. And the other thing was partners. You know, if you don't know how to work with wood or you don't know how to build stuff, find somebody that does. You got a aunt or an uncle or a neighbor or some old retired guy or somebody. There's people that love to do stuff like that. And if you don't feel comfortable with hammers and drills and don't have experience, you can't do it alone. Find partners and mentors. So that would be my two comments. What you said was great. Thanks a lot. This is really great information.
Thanks, Carl.
Thanks, Carl. Yeah, I will say that when we developed with the Good Acre, we developed a that initial design where there was a spray table on one side and then there was three relatively small wash tanks with a drain in one end. We had those developed and built by a high school ag class, and they used CAD and they made us the specs along with the Good Acre, and then we're able to build it. So that was just somebody that we got connected to through the Farmers Union, I think. But even Boy Scouts, there are often people, especially if it's like a building, a hand washing stand or something is not super technically difficult, that people can come in with some power tools and help out.
On that
Yes.
hand wash, on that for the fabric on the lands downs that you walk on, I think that it's important that you look at maybe a quality like Belton, which has got the stripes on it that could last for 10 years. And you probably have to go to a landscape supply company or a landscaper. But so many cheap fabric you can buy from Menards and all those places that don't last. They're fine, or they're not really fine. They're okay for a homeowner to put down on a rock, but a landscape company would never put that cheaper stuff down. So even that may cost you 15 cents a square foot, it's going to could last you for 10 years. I mean, you can move it from place to place and reuse it again. So Belton quality, they have the stripes on, so they kind of can tell you can kind of pick it off that that's what it really is. And I think that'd be important for people that are looking for the fabric.
Thanks, Steve.
Thank you. And I think you brought up a really good point I just want to reinforce, which is, oftentimes when we try to use things on the farm that were built for gardeners, they're not going to last because they were built for much lower usage. So really thinking through, where do you have money to spend? And I think when we're talking about buying stuff like you said with the landscaping fabric, the average landscaping fabric was not built to have 5 employees holding 50-pound bins of produce walking over every single day for 5 years. So making sure you're investing in higher quality stuff will definitely pay off in the long run.
Does anybody else have any tips, things that they've learned as they've developed these kind of more low-cost pack shed packing areas? Okay, yeah, great point there, Jana. One thing that we did learn is the shelter logic carport, first of all, was pretty difficult to put up, like Ariel said. We had 3 adults, one of whom was a pretty, accomplished builder, and it took us probably 3 hours I think if you did a few of them, it might get easier, but you're probably not doing a few of them. So it will take a while. If you're okay with that, it's very doable. But then the other thing is that model did get pushed down in wind. So really do pay attention to that wind and anchoring. It's extremely important.
Yeah.
I will just mention about the drainage. It is really important, and we didn't highlight it here, but just to think about how you're getting the water away. So if you're even got 100 gallons, or, you know, let's say it's not full, so you're at 75 gallons of water, that's a lot of water to go right at your feet. So if you have that wider 1.5-inch drain hole that Ariel mentioned on the Rubbermaid from Tractor Supply, or if you get another version and then just use a hole saw and put a hole into it, then you can retrofit it with PVC, basic PVC fittings, go into the plumbing aisle at Menards and or Home Depot, and you just put a fitting in, and then you attach a piece of PVC, and then we used a hose clamp and clamped some lay flat, some of the wider lay flat hosing to the end of it with a hose clamp or two. And then that is able to send the water away. And then you're kind of controlling the water. There's a lot of water in post-harvest, and we want to change our water frequently. So being able to do it pretty easily and efficiently, it becomes really important, because what we don't want is for just us to use the same water over and over. That water starts to get warm and really dirty and turbid, and that's, our produce might go looking, you know, okay when it leaves our farm, but it could have definitely more potential for contamination to be on it, because we're reusing that same water over and over. So whatever was on those first, you know, bits of greens coming in now is on all the subsequent ones. So it's important to change a lot. Drainage is important for that.
And I do think Annalisa brings up a really good point too, that as you're thinking about your pack shed design, people by their nature are not going to follow systems that are not easy. So for example, if we tell people, hey, every time after you're done using the hose, you've got to like go find a random place to kind of loop it over so it's not on the ground, versus if we just have an easy place to hang the hose, we know hoses are just going to end up on the ground. And in the same way as Annalisa said, we can go in with the best of intentions or an SOP that we change our water all of the time. But if we know every time we change the water, we're going to have to sit there with nothing to do for 40 minutes, we're not going to do it. And so I think one of the best ways you can make your farm food safe is by making it easy to do the food safety tests. Another example is just have the hand washing station really close to where you're processing produce. Don't make somebody walk 5 minutes to go wash their hands. We know if we do that, they're not going to want to walk every time they blow their nose or they drop something on the ground. So I think like there's multiple reasons to be efficient, and it's both for the efficiency of the operation, also for the food safety of it.
Okay, well, I'm going to launch the polls here. If you would all just take 1 minute here. Do these. So there's 5 short questions if you use that scroller bar and scroll down. Yeah, Jana mentioned that they do have a snow load and wind tolerance listed. It can be really hard to tell online though, right? Because everyone describes their tent as very high quality and, you know, like, well, and they don't always have great pictures of what the components actually look like, and you don't always know until you get it. So that all tent was sturdy. Oh, Britt says, I did not scroll down. Are you able to launch the poll again? No, because that would end it for everybody else. Britt, it's okay. Yeah, just scroll down and do your best to answer them all. So we've got 13 people on. And then next week, we will be talking about more enclosed pack sheds and some of the materials, supplies, and setup designs that would be in that sort of a design. Okay, well, if you have answered the polls, feel free to log off. Thank you, Ariel, for that great presentation. Really useful information. And we have 3 more. So we will be hearing from other farmers as well in the other ones as well. So we hope that you come back. These are also being recorded and we will make them available after we finish this series. So thank you all for your time today. Great start to your planting season. I am going to go ahead and end the poll. And I'm going to end the recording.